the silence before the storm. The air in my own living room felt heavier than lead. My fingers traced the cold glass of water on the coffee table, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. How long had they been laughing behind my back? How long had I been walking around like a blindfolded fool, cooking dinner, folding laundry, and listening to my husband, David, complain about how exhausted he was from working late? Working late, right. Family is everything. That is what my mother always taught us before she passed away. "Stick together," she whispered from her hospital bed, gripping my hand and then my younger sister Clara's hand. "Protect each other." I took those words and carved them into my heart. I treated Clara like my own child. When she wanted to go to fashion college, I paid her tuition out of my own savings. When she struggled to find an apartment, I turned our guest room into her sanctuary. I gave her keys to my house, a seat at my table, and a place in my soul. And in return, they built a secret world right beneath my nose. A world complete with a home I never knew existed, a double life I never suspected, and 2 innocent lives that shattered my reality into a million jagged pieces. My name is Maya, and this is the story of how my perfect life collapsed in a single afternoon, and how I traded my tears for a cold, calculated justice that left my betrayers begging for mercy. If you are listening to this right now, take a deep breath, because the people closest to you are sometimes the ones holding the knife. Let's dive into the bitter truth of what happened when I found out my husband had twins with my sister, how I divorced him without shedding a single tear, and why his mother turned completely pale when I dropped the ultimate question. She didn't tell you. The golden cage and the whispering shadows. They say betrayal always wears a familiar face. If a stranger stabs you in the dark, you feel the pain, but your heart doesn't break. But when the blade is held by the 2 people you loved most in this world, your husband and your flesh and blood, the pain doesn't just hurt. It burns every memory to ashes. Let me take you back to how it all looked from the outside. To the world, David and I were the definition of success. He was a senior partner at a mid-sized corporate consulting firm, sharp-suited, charming, and endlessly ambitious. I ran a successful boutique interior design studio. We lived in a stunning, sunlit suburban home with manicured lawns and large bay windows that caught the golden afternoon light. We had been married for 6 years. We didn't have children yet, though not for lack of trying. For the first 4 years, we actively planned for a family. But month after month, negative tests brought a quiet grief into our bedroom. David would always hold me close, kiss my forehead, and whisper, "Don't worry, my love. It's just you and me against the world. That's enough for me." His words used to be my armor. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Then came Clara. Clara was 24, vibrant, sharp-tongued, and fiercely independent, or so she projected. After she graduated, she practically lived at our house. David was the one who suggested it. "Maya, she's family," he told me one evening while loosening his silk tie. "We have the space. Let her stay with us while she gets on her feet. It'll be nice for you to have some company while I travel for work." Looking back, that was the first crack in the foundation. David started traveling more frequently. 3-day business trips to Chicago, week-long strategy sessions in New York. Every time he packed his leather duffel bag, Clara would magically appear in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee just the way he liked it, handing it to him with a lingering touch that I foolishly dismissed as sisterly affection. "You're spoiling him, Clara," I used to laugh, leaning against the counter. "Someone has to keep him alive, big sis," she would reply with a quick, nervous grin before looking down at her phone. I ignored the signs because I wanted to trust them. Trust is a comfortable blanket. It keeps you warm even when the house is freezing. But winter was coming, and the chill was about to set in permanently. The first real anomaly happened on a rainy Tuesday in October. David had left his phone on the kitchen island. As I walked past it to grab my car keys, the screen lit up with a text message notification. It wasn't from a client named Mr. Henderson or a colleague named Sarah. It was a text from a contact, saved simply as C. The preview line read, "The twins are asking why you haven't read them their bedtime story yet. Hurry back." I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Twins? What twins? David didn't have siblings with twins. None of our close friends had twins. I picked up the phone, my fingers ice cold. Before I could unlock it, David had the passcode, but I didn't. The phone went dark. A shadow fell over the doorway. David was standing there, his raincoat dripping onto the hardwood floor. His eyes darted from my hand to the phone on the island. For a split second, the polished, confident corporate mask slipped. His face twisted into a look of absolute panic, a look I had never seen in 6 years of marriage. "Maya," he said, his voice instantly defensive. "What are you doing with my phone?" The web of lies begins to unravel. Panic is a strange emotion. When you are hit with a revelation too massive for your brain to process, your mind tries to protect you by pretending everything is normal. "It lit up," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "A text from C, it mentioned twins." David's shoulders visibly dropped, but the panic in his eyes morphed into something colder, calculation. He walked over, smoothly scooped up the phone, and slipped it into his coat pocket with a practiced, casual shrug. "Ah, that. It's nothing, honey. You know my business partner, Craig? He and his wife just had twins. He's been going through a rough patch, and I've been helping him out with childcare tips and financial planning. Sometimes he texts me late." Craig. I knew Craig. Craig was a balding, 45-year-old father of 3 who lived 3 towns over. "Craig," I asked, narrowing my eyes, "since when do you text Craig about bedtime stories?" "Maya, don't start creating drama out of nothing," David sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose in an exaggerated display of exhaustion. "I'm tired. I've been on a plane for 4 hours, dealing with difficult clients, and the first thing I get when I walk through the door is an interrogation about Craig's domestic life. Really." He weaponized my empathy against me. He made me feel guilty for questioning him. That was his superpower, making me feel like the irrational one, the insecure wife, the suspicious partner who didn't appreciate how hard he worked for our family. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, looking down at the floor. "It just sounded odd." "Everything sounds odd when you look for ghosts, Maya," he said softly, walking over to wrap his arms around my waist. He kissed the top of my head. His skin smelled of expensive cologne and rain. "Trust me, it's just you and me." If only I knew, then what I know now. That very same week, Clara announced she was moving out. "I found a wonderful little apartment downtown," she announced over dinner, poking at her lasagna. "It's close to my new job. I think it's time I stood on my own 2 feet." I felt a sudden pang of sadness. "Are you sure, Clara? You don't have to rush. The guest room is always yours." "No, big sis," she said, avoiding my eyes. Her gaze flicked toward David, who was quietly cutting his food without looking up. "It's time. I need my own space, for personal reasons." She moved out that Saturday. David rented a large moving van, insisting he go with her to help set up her furniture. He was gone for 10 hours. When he came back, he looked drained, his knuckles slightly bruised. "What happened to your hand?" I asked, pointing to his right hand. "Moved a heavy sofa," he muttered. "Pinched it against the wall, don't worry about it." I didn't worry about it. Not then. I helped Clara unpack, bought her a housewarming gift basket worth $500, and wished her well in her new independent life. Little did I know, the apartment downtown wasn't her sanctuary. It was her prison, and David was the warden. The crack in the mirror. 2 months passed in an uneasy rhythm. David's business trips became more frequent, lasting 4 days at a time, sometimes stretching into weekends. Whenever he was home, he was glued to his phone. If I walked into the room, he would quickly flip the screen face down. My intuition, that quiet, persistent voice inside every woman, began screaming at me day and night. But intuition without proof is just paranoia, and I refused to act like a crazy, unhinged wife without facts. So, I decided to do what any designer would do when facing a messy room. I started looking closely at the blueprint of my life. It started with bank statements. David handled the primary investments, but we had a joint account for household expenses. One afternoon, while reviewing our utility bills, I noticed a recurring automatic transfer of $2,000 every month, labeled Storage Unit Uptown Logistics. Storage unit? We didn't own any furniture in storage. When we moved into this house, we sold everything we didn't use. I pulled up our credit card history. There were charges for high-end baby formula, diapers, infant clothing from boutique organic brands, and pediatric clinic visits in a zip code 20 miles away from our home, the exact neighborhood where Clara's new apartment was located. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Clara doesn't have a baby, I told myself. She lives alone. Or so she claimed. On a foggy Thursday morning, David kissed me goodbye at the front door, grabbed his leather briefcase, and announced he was flying to Chicago for a 3-day corporate retreat. "Call me when you land," I said, giving him a neutral smile. "Will do, sweetheart, love you." He drove out of the driveway. I waited 10 minutes, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to Uptown Logistics. It was a modern, climate-controlled storage facility with electronic gate access. I parked my car 3 blocks away and walked over, wearing dark sunglasses and a trench coat. Luck was on my side. A delivery truck was pulling out, holding the electronic security gate open. I slipped past the guard station while the attendant was distracted by a phone call. I walked down Sector C, row 400. Unit 412. The heavy metal door was unlocked, not fully closed, just latched shut. My hands shook as I reached out and pulled the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a wave of warm air mixed with the scent of lavender baby powder and warm milk. I stepped inside, and my breath caught permanently in my throat. It wasn't a storage unit filled with old boxes or spare furniture. It was a fully furnished, luxurious studio apartment. There was a crib with pastel blue and pink blankets, a rocking chair, shelves stacked with infant toys, a changing table, and a small kitchenette. On the kitchen counter lay a stack of mail. I stepped closer, my vision blurring with hot, sudden tears. The envelopes were addressed to Clara Vance and David Vance.
And start drawing.
And next to the mail was a framed photograph. It was taken in a hospital delivery room. David was sitting in a hospital armchair, looking exhausted but fiercely proud, holding 2 swaddled infants against his chest. Standing right beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder with a radiant, triumphant smile, was my sister, Clara. Beneath the photo, a digital birth certificate printout lay face up. Date of birth, 14 months ago. Father, David Vance. Mother, Clara Vance. 14 months ago. That was right in the middle of the year. David claimed he had to work late every single night to secure the company's biggest account. That was when I was taking him homemade dinners at his office. Dinners the receptionist told me he had left hours earlier to attend to family emergencies. The floor seemed to drop away beneath my feet. The silence in that tiny room was deafening. My own husband, the man I shared a bed with, the man who held my hand through my own fertility struggles, had built a secret family with my younger sister. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had mocked me. Every smile Clara gave me, every comforting hug David offered when I cried about not being able to conceive, it was all a sick, twisted game. I didn't scream, I didn't smash the picture frame, I didn't break down crying. A terrifying, icy calm washed over me. The grief evaporated, replaced by something much sharper, much colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Revenge isn't about shouting or throwing punches. True revenge is a masterpiece of precision, and I was about to paint my masterpiece. The calm before the hurricane. I spent the next 48 hours executing phase 1 of my plan. First, I hired a top-tier private investigator recommended by a corporate lawyer friend. Within 24 hours, he handed me a complete dossier. Certified copies of the birth certificates, lease agreements for the secret apartment paid for out of a secret corporate slush fund David managed, and hotel receipts from romantic getaways David and Clara took together while telling me he was out of state for business. Second, I visited a family law attorney, the most ruthless shark in the city. "Mrs. Vance," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses as he looked over the financial records and the DNA equivalent evidence of adultery and asset dissipation. If we play our cards right, your husband won't just lose his house and his money. He will lose his corporate reputation. This constitutes corporate fraud using company funds to maintain a secondary household. I don't just want a divorce. I said quietly, my voice steady as stone. I want total exposure. I want them to reap every single seed they planted. Consider it done, the lawyer smiled grimly. On Sunday evening, David returned from his Chicago trip. He walked through the front door looking relaxed, smelling of expensive cologne, carrying a small box of gourmet chocolates. "Honey, I'm home," he called out, tossing his keys onto the counter. "The Chicago deal went through. I'm exhausted, but we closed it." I was sitting at the dining table, sipping a cup of green tea. The house was spotless, bathed in the soft orange glow of sunset. "Welcome back, David," I said, looking up with a soft, pleasant smile. "Did you have a good trip?" "Amazing," he lied smoothly, walking over to kiss my cheek. I didn't flinch. I let his lips brush my skin, feeling a sickening wave of disgust that I swallowed instantly. "I missed you like crazy. Let's order takeout tonight, my treat." "That sounds wonderful," I replied smoothly. "Actually, David, before we order, we need to talk about something important." He paused, a tiny flicker of unease crossing his features before he plastered his charming smile back on. "Oh, sounds serious. What's on your mind?" "It's about family," I said, standing up slowly. "Family legacy, family support. You always said family comes first, didn't you?" "Of course I did, Maya. You know how I feel about that." "Good," I said, walking over to the living room and picking up a thick manila envelope from the coffee table. I held it out to him. "Because I invited some very special guests over for dinner tomorrow night, to celebrate." David frowned, looking at the envelope without taking it. "Guests? Who?" "Your mother," I said softly. "And Clara. I thought it's time we all sat down together and cleared the air about everything, don't you think?" The color drained from David's face, so fast it was, as if someone had pulled a plug in his veins. The charming corporate executive vanished, replaced by a cornered animal staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. "Maya," he stammered, his voice cracking. What is this?" "Open it, David," I whispered, stepping closer and dropping the heavy envelope right into his shaking hands. "Read it, every single page, because tomorrow night, the truth is coming out for everyone to see." The grand finale and the pale mother. Monday evening arrived with the precision of a Swiss clock. The dining table was set with my finest porcelain plates and silver cutlery. Soft jazz played in the background. At exactly 6:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. I walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the porch was my mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance, a proud, elegant woman in her late 60s who always held herself with aristocratic posture. Right behind her stood Clara, looking nervous, clutching a designer handbag like a shield, her eyes darting around the hallway. "Maya, darling," Eleanor smiled warmly, stepping inside and air-kissing my cheek. "It's been too long. And look, I brought Clara along. She ran into me in the lobby and said you invited her too. How lovely of you to bring the family together." "Yes," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "Very lovely indeed. Please come in. Dinner is ready in the dining room." David was already sitting at the head of the table. He looked like a ghost. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and his hands were clenched so tightly into fists that his knuckles were stark white. We all took our seats. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a butcher's knife. Eleanor noticed it immediately, her sharp eyes scanning her son's pale face and my serene expression. "Is something the matter?" Eleanor asked, setting her napkin on her lap. "Everyone looks like they're attending a funeral." "Oh, not a funeral, Eleanor," I said, pouring water into my crystal glass. "A birth, actually." Eleanor chuckled lightly. "A birth? What are you talking about?" I didn't answer right away. I reached down, picked up the manila envelope, and slid 3 copies across the polished mahogany table, one in front of Eleanor, one in front of a trembling Clara and one in front of a paralyzed David. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Open them. Consider it a late family reunion gift from me." Elena frowned, perplexed. She slid the contents out of the envelope. The first page was the lease agreement for the Uptown storage apartment, paid by David's corporate slush fund. The second page was the hospital birth certificates listing David Vance and Clara Vance as the parents of twin boys, now 14 months old. The third page was the DNA test summary, confirming 99.9% paternity. The dining room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. You could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Elena stared at the papers. Her breathing grew shallow. The color rushed out of her face, leaving her skin a ghastly, translucent gray. She looked like she had just been struck by lightning. Her hands trembled violently, scattering the papers across the table. She turned her horrified gaze from the documents to her son, and then to her youngest daughter-in-law, Clara. "David," Elena whispered, her voice cracking with pure disbelief and profound shock. "What? What is this? Is this a joke? Tell me this is a sick joke." David couldn't speak. He stared at his plate, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, utterly incapable of forming a single word of defense. Elena then looked at Clara, her eyes blazing with fury and disgust. "Clara, you, my son's wife's sister, you did this." Clara burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen. We fell in love. Maya, please understand." "Understand what, Clara?" I finally spoke, my voice cutting through her sobs like a razor blade. I stood up slowly from my chair, looking down at the three of them with absolute, unshakable dignity. "Understand that you lied to my face for years. Understand that while I was crying myself to sleep praying for a child with your husband, you two were playing house behind my back. Understand that you built a secret life using my money and my trust." Elena reached across the table, her hand gripping David's arm so hard her fingernails dug into his suit jacket. "David, look at me right now," she gasped, her voice trembling with sheer outrage. "How could you do this to your wife? How could you bring this filth into our family?" She turned back to Clara, her face twisted in absolute contempt. "And you viper, you were welcomed into this home. We fed you, we clothed you, and you repaid us by destroying your own blood." Elena suddenly clutched her chest, gasping for air. The shock was too much for her hypertensive heart. David jumped up, panicked, trying to steady his mother. Mom, breathe, please." "Don't touch me," Elena screamed, shoving her son away with surprising force. She glared at him with tears streaming down her powdered cheeks. "You are no son of mine. You are a monster." I walked over to the sideboard, picked up my car keys and my designer handbag, and looked down at David, who was now kneeling beside his hyperventilating mother while Clara wept uncontrollably in the corner. "The divorce papers have already been filed," I said calmly, looking straight into David's terrified, tear-filled eyes. "My lawyer has all the evidence of corporate embezzlement you used to fund your secret family. Your firm will know by tomorrow morning. Your career is over, David. Your secret apartment is locked. And as for you, Clara, you are dead to me." David scrambled up from the floor, reaching out toward me with desperate, trembling hands. Maya, please, don't do this. We can fix this. Think about our marriage." I stepped back, dodging his touch as if he were carrying a deadly plague. I looked at him with cold, pitying eyes. "What marriage, David?" I asked softly. And then, leaning in close so only he could hear the final, devastating blow, I smiled and whispered the exact words that shattered his remaining soul. "She didn't tell you. I recorded every single confession you made in the storage unit last week. It's already in the hands of the federal prosecutor." David went even paler than his mother, collapsing back onto the floor with a hollow, defeated thud. I turned around, walked out of the front door into the cool evening air, and never looked back. The reflection and the new dawn. They say time heals all wounds. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I know time clears the debris. It has been 6 months since that fateful dinner. David lost everything. His firm fired him for financial fraud and embezzlement of corporate funds to maintain a secondary residence.
And start
His
drawing.
professional reputation is completely in ruins, and he faces potential federal charges. The secret apartment is gone, and Clara, realizing David had no money left and no future, left him within weeks, taking the twins back to our hometown where nobody knows their names, living in a cramped studio apartment, working a minimum wage job to make ends meet. Eleanor called me once, crying hysterically, begging for forgiveness for raising such a monster. I listened politely, told her I forgave her for her blindness, but wished her well and changed my phone number the very next day. And me. I didn't break. I didn't crumble. I took my grief, forged it into steel, and rebuilt my life from the ground up. My interior design studio just landed a massive commercial contract for a luxury hotel downtown. My home is filled with light, peace, and absolute quiet, a quiet that no longer feels empty, but liberated. Betrayal tries to bury you, but what people like David and Clara forget is that some of us aren't seeds waiting to be crushed. We are seeds waiting to bloom through the concrete. If this story resonated with your soul, if it reminded you of the strength you carry inside yourself when the world tries to break you, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Calm Girl Stories for more cinematic journeys into truth, justice, and resilience. Thank you for watching, and remember, never let anyone make you feel small in a house you built with your own hands. Until next time, take care of your peace.